You found the skeleton. How would you tell it to represent? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here with my first patron request video. Bent Hovind is someone you may know as my co-host for Kent with Bent, but he's also one of my patrons, and he recently upped his pledge to the tier where he can request a video and I am compelled to make it by my own word. And of course, being nearly as big a nerd as me, he decided I should do a video about the linguistic problems of Darmok, the second episode of the 5th season of Star Trek The Next Generation. It is one of the more popular episodes of that show. Indeed, it is tied for the 13th highest rated episode on IMDb. I'm not here to review it, but I tend to agree with IMDb that, as a story, it is excellent. That being said, there will be spoilers for the show. As of the time of me writing the script, the episode is available on Netflix, so if you want to watch the episode before you see the video, pause now, go check it out, and come back. I'll wait. Okay, now that you're back, let's get into it. First, I want to point out that while I'm about to shred the linguistics in Darmok, the concept of encountering a group with whom one cannot communicate is not a new problem. In fact, in relatively recent events, there was a death involving a famously impossible to talk to group of humans. In late 2018, John Allen Chow went to the remote and off-limits North Sentinel Island with the intention of converting the tribe who lives there to Christianity. The island is in the Andaman Sea and is technically part of India, but the Indian government does not really govern it, have any legal or law enforcement staff there, and does not attempt to prosecute islanders for any crimes, including murder of others, whether Indian citizens or foreigners. The islanders are considered uncontacted, although there have been visits and a kidnapping by British explorers, as well as more recent attempts to give gifts. The British originally brought with them natives of a nearby island who seemed culturally similar to the Sentinelese, but they were unable to communicate. The Sentinelese will kill or attempt to kill anyone who lands on their island, although they have been known to accept gifts peacefully from ships anchored offshore in shallow water where they can wait out. It is entirely possible that centuries could go by without anyone ever speaking to the North Sentinelese, and them being entirely excluded from the technological developments of the world. So what's up with Darmok then? It seems perfectly reasonable that a spaceship could come across an alien race the crew simply can't understand. Well, the first problem is that Star Trek has a device called the Universal Translator that can translate nearly everything said by any species, apparently even in cases where language is being encountered for the first time. And in Darmok, it technically works on the Tamarians in the episode. For example, when the alien captain says, "Temba, his arms wide," the Universal Translator is able to immediately interpret the whole phrase, and only leaves Temba as cryptic because it is a proper noun and so not really translatable. So what's the problem with talking to the Tamarians? Well, they speak entirely in metaphor, and I mean entirely. Every single utterance they make is either interrupted or takes the form of one or more proper names, and then a situation is described involving these characters. Here are some examples.
Rai and Jiri at Luka. Rai of Luwani. Luwani under 2 moons. Jiri of Umbaya. Umbaya of Crossroads at Lunga. Darmok and Zilard at Tanagra. Cinder! His face black, his eyes red.
First, as a reminder, a metaphor is a figure of speech that is not literal. In order to understand a metaphor, 2 things are needed. One is that one must understand the literal meaning of the words. The other is that one must be able to extrapolate the intended meaning from the literal meaning by familiarity with both the actual circumstance and the circumstances surrounding the literal meaning of the words. For example, the statement, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players, they have their exits and their entrances," is a famous Shakespearean metaphor. Most English speakers will have no trouble connecting entrance to birth and exit to death, and the intervening period as the life of an individual human. On the other hand, someone who does not speak English will simply hear unintelligible sounds. For an example of a metaphor you won't understand, let's see a Klingon metaphor. This one is Boit Lop. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you didn't understand the literal words, so we have our first barrier to understanding. But here's the literal meaning. The plates are full. I'm guessing you still don't know what that means. It turns out it means that's great news, and refers to the joy of seeing full plates at a feast, as Klingons love their feasts that involve lots of rich foods and heavy drinking. Apparently, in the episode, the Universal Translator has gotten past the first problem, but can't get past the second problem because the Tamarians are making references to mytho-historical characters that are not familiar to any of the crew. The problem with this whole thing, though, is that it's impossible. Not that it's impossible to have a culture steeped in metaphor, but that it's impossible to have a language consisting of only metaphor. But why is that? Well, the most basic problem there is with the first requirement of a metaphor. The listener must have an understanding of the literal meaning of the words, and this requires that there be a literal, non-metaphorical basis which all speakers understand, complete with syntax, grammar, and vocabulary. Now, it need not be a large language, since the shades of meaning are being enhanced through heavy use of metaphor. But the basic literal language must be there and be capable of expressing non-metaphorical meaning. In the episode, this does not seem to exist, as presumably the universal translator is able to translate the crew's words into the equivalent words that are used to compose the Tamarians' metaphors. But the Tamarians seem to be unable to comprehend any of the literal statements from Commander Riker or Captain Picard. Now, it could be the case, at least hypothetically, that a single generation of Tamarians will simply disregard the literal meaning of words and only speak in their metaphors. But this will cause a problem in transmission of the language to the next generation. As an example, I remember an instance where a child was incredulous that Albert Einstein was really so called, because according to him, Einstein was a word that meant an extremely smart person. To him, his prior knowledge of the word Einstein was only in a manner that adults considered metaphorical, but he did not realize this and assumed that the metaphorical meaning was simply the literal meaning of the word. This would occur population-wide if at any point the Tamarians stopped using literal language completely. The upcoming generation would reinterpret all the metaphors as the new literal language, and their metaphorical nature would be obscured. Presumably at this point, rather than translating the utterances of the Tamarians as metaphors, the universal translator would translate their meanings as the Tamarians intended them. Basically, a completely metaphorical language is impossible. Now, that's not to say that there couldn't be a language that humans couldn't understand in real time, and that would be more or less impossible to understand in real time no matter how good your translator were. One example taken from computing of a language that an alien species could perhaps speak, that a human could not parse in real time, would be the use of a last-in, first-out stack at the discourse level. This works by first establishing a list of words in the stack, then a word refers to entries in the stack, such that the first use of the word indicates that the last spoken word in the stack is the intended meaning. The next use of the word refers to the word used before the last one, and so on. Let's see how this would work in practice using English and the word it for stack reference. Now, you may recognize the passage, but that's not really the point. I have modified it slightly to make the exercise work, so here's how it would go. Stack begin. Age, safety, peace, light, revelation, position, reality, vistas, knowledge, day, direction, sciences, infinity, seas, ignorance, island, contents, mind, human, inability, word, thing. Stack end. The most merciful it in the it, I think, is the it of the it correlates all its contents. We live in a placid it of it in the midst of a black it of it, and we were not meant to voyage far. The it, each training in its own it, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piecing together of disassociated it will open up such terrifying it of it, and our frightful it therein, that we shall either go mad from the it, or flee from the deadly it into the it and it of a new dark it. You probably couldn't make heads or tails of that, but if you sat and carefully used the rules where the last spoken item on the stack is the reference for the first it, and the second to last is the referent for the second it would in fact be a completely intelligible paragraph. And one that cannot be translated in anything near real time. So this idea of a completely alien language humans could not hope to even translate effectively via universal translator isn't a bad idea. It's just that the way the writers of the episode did it is a bit nonsensical. Well, that's all for this one. It was a bit unusual as I don't normally cover linguistics or Star Trek, but when your top patron and regular co-host asks you to do a video about a particular Star Trek episode, you make one. If you enjoyed this, then please hit like, and if you're not already subscribed, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Fair warning though, Star Trek and language are not the normal focus of this channel, so take a look through my other stuff to see if it interests you. It's mostly about counter-creationism, paleontology, and every once in a great while I cover some medical pseudoscience. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I'd like to thank my patrons, especially my diapsid and above patrons, Ben Tovand, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Henry Hutanen, Bob Knob, and the Evil Scotsman. In this time of global difficulty, the support of my patrons means a lot to me. If you would like to join the team, a link to my Patreon is in the description. The first tier is only $1, and you can get access to the exclusive patron-only Discord server. If a monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you'd still like to support the channel, I also have a Teespring store and an Amazon wishlist, both linked in the description.
You found the skeleton. How would you tell people that this happens? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.